Hello and welcome to SportsZone. We're kicking it off with the important stuff like usual. Studio 90. I'm joined by Aaron as usual. And in the world of soccer, I think something that happened kind of right after we went off the air last time was the first domestic cup that was won across Europe. Manchester City defeated Arsenal in the Carabao Cup 3-0, Pep Guardiola's first trophy in England. They lost in the FA Cup, so the quadruple is not still on, but possibly the first leg of a treble for them. And Aaron, sort of two teams heading in vastly different directions. I mean, can you sort of contrast the directions that Manchester City's heading, like 20 points clear, top of the league, and Arsenal just drifting off into irrelevancy?
Right, so obviously Man City coming into this game as favorites, having such a big lead in the Premier League, and definitely to be expected that they won this game. They dominated the game, they dominated possession, they played very well, and you would expect nothing less from this Man City team under Pep Guardiola this season, who have played not only have played so well, but just style-wise have just really changed the way we look at teams in the Premier League and the way that they play. So definitely a great performance by Man City, especially attacking-wise. But for Arsenal, like you said, a team going in a completely different direction. Defensively, I think is their biggest issue. Obviously they brought in Aubameyang and Mkhitaryan, but I don't think they addressed their biggest issue, which was their back line, their center backs. And you saw that on that first goal when pretty much Ederson just punted the ball up to Aguero and Mustafi, just let the ball bounce over him, and they scored that goal. So obviously a bad performance by Arsenal, but like I said, their biggest issue was their defense. They didn't address it in the January transfer window, and I think that's a big reason why they lost this game and why they've been on a downward spiral recently.
And you could possibly, if you're trying to be an optimist from the Arsenal perspective, argue that Manchester City is that good, and that sort of would be expected. But then they follow it up, and they lose to City in the league in the midweek, and then they lose today against Brighton. So it's not necessarily just that City's that good. It seems Arsenal's that bad at the moment. Aaron, lots of calls for Arsene Wenger to finally, call it up. Do you think that this time it'll finally bear fruit and Wenger will be given a sack?
Wenger, in my opinion, is going to be at this club until he chooses not to be. And I don't think that's the way it should be. I think he should have been gone a few years ago. He was a great manager for them once with the Invincibles team and back in the day, leading Arsenal. But I think it's just gone stale for them right now. Obviously, it's not working, but I think Arsene Wenger has such a strong influence on the board at Arsenal that there's just no chance that they're going to push him out. And at some point, he's just going to choose to step down. But for Arsenal fans who are calling for him to be fired, I don't think that's going to happen just because he has a strong foothold on the board. Financially, he does great for Arsenal, so they like him. So Arsene Wenger is going to be there until he chooses to step down, whether that's this summer, whether that's next summer, or a few years down the road. But I definitely think that he's not going to be forced out. He's going to go out at Arsenal on his own terms.
That seems to be the case because he seems contract extension after contract extension. Other big clubs might not have had this tolerance, but Arsenal at the moment seems destined for their second consecutive finish outside the top four and missing out on a Champions League spot. But using Champions League as sort of a pivot, we're back into Champions League this week, and next week has sort of been impacted by a huge injury to a player with potentially not just Champions League ramifications, but World Cup ramifications. That was Neymar injured his ankle for PSG last weekend. There was disputes in the reporting on how long he was going to be out, but it seems like he's going to be out substantial amount of time, at least a couple months. Aaron, does this sort of, in the short term, how does this impact PSG, and do you think there might be potentially World Cup implications for Neymar?
Well, obviously Neymar, who in my opinion is the third best player in the world, PSG losing him is going to be a big loss for them. They still have Cavani, they still have Mbappe, they still have Demir, so they still definitely have attacking threats. So they're not going to be completely shot by this injury, but I definitely think that's going to hurt them. Neymar being their leader this season, and for Brazil going into the World Cup, I think Neymar, which I read in the reports, will be ready by the time the World Cup comes. But just going into the World Cup, coming off an injury, not being able to play, first team games is definitely going to be tough for him. And I think it could definitely impact Brazil in the World Cup.
Certainly, because he's the talisman that maybe they're looking for to right the wrongs of 4 years ago when they were embarrassed in their home country by Germany. So a lot of hopes riding on Neymar to get better and sort of get back to the level that he's been performing at recently. So that's certainly something that could shake up the world stage. But sort of shifting from Europe to stateside, where we had our domestic league MLS begin matches yesterday as well as today. We have new club Los Angeles FC, debuting. We have the returning champions Toronto FC losing in their opening game. Aaron, sort of looking ahead to this MLS season, what are some of the things that you'll be sort of targeting as storylines to follow?
Well, I'm hoping that there's some new teams emerge this year, and we've had 2 consecutive finals with Toronto and Seattle, so I hope that some new teams sort of emerge. And I think we saw that in the first week, a couple of big surprises, the Columbus Crew beating Toronto FC, Giassi's artist actually scoring a goal, which was a big surprise to me. And also Atlanta United, who many picked to be sort of a dark horse to win MLS Cup this year, losing 4-0 to a Houston team. So I'm definitely hoping that some new teams emerge this year, and we definitely saw that the first week, that there were some big surprises. And also a new club coming in LAFC. Obviously they have Carlos Vela. They're managed by Rob Bradley, so they definitely have star power. But it's going to be interesting to see whether that star power is going to translate to success week in and week out this MLS season. So definitely some big surprises the first week, but I think it's going to be a fun season, and I hope that TFC and Seattle aren't in the final again. I hope it's a new final.
And if it were to be a new final, based on just the offseason, first game, limited evidence, which teams do you think can sort of challenge for that throne?
Well, I talked about Atlanta United. They didn't have a good first week, but I definitely think they can confirm. Barco, which was their big signing, which was the biggest transfer fee in MLS history. He's an 18-year-old, a guy who many see as can be an Argentinian international in the future. He's injured right now, but he's gonna come back in 4 to 6 weeks. So once he comes back, I think Atlanta United are a big favorite to come out of the East. And then out of the West, I definitely think that there are a lot of teams that could be in contention. I think LA Galaxy, which is a team that didn't really play well last season, I think they can emerge as maybe a dark horse to come out of the Western Conference. They traded for Ola Kamara. There are reports that Zlatan Ibrahimovic is going to come in the summer. So that's definitely a team that I can see making MLS Cup.
And with MLS back, a lot more excitement stateside, so that's something that we'll certainly follow as the MLS season progresses. But I think that's all that we have for this edition of Studio 90. Stick around for more SportsZone after this.